welcome to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Now, here's Ed Wilson with God's 5 Minutes.
Hello, friends. The 3rd, 4th, and 5th verses of the 35th Psalm read, "Say unto my soul, I am thy salvation. Let them be confounded and put to shame that seek after my soul. Let them be turned back and brought to confusion that devise my hurt." William Shakespeare, that clever English poet, wrote it some 400 years ago, and many a head of state has found it so in the generations since. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. David's royal life was in many ways a turbulent nightmare, plagued by various envious and resentful souls who hated him and coveted his position. Many of his psalms are records of prayers that he prayed for deliverance and also for God's vindication against his enemies. The 35th is an example of that. While it perhaps originally was intended as a cry to God against persecution from people, it also contains things that can inspire modern-day Christians who seek not earthly crowns but heavenly ones, and were just as opposed as David was by the ugly, diabolical impetus that, at the deepest level, motivated his opponents, the devil himself. For the believer, locked in struggle throughout his lifetime with old Diabolus, it's a wonderful thing to have God to say to his soul, "I am thy salvation." None of us are saved by works. None of us have a life good enough or pure enough to earn salvation. We need God to be our salvation. We need Him to save us from our own emotions when we are tempted to feel depressed or angry or lustful. We need God's salvation greatly when life's fearful chasms yawn before us. David's prayer lies on the lips of every child of God, and David's prayer was answered. He had his failures in life, both moral and spiritual. He was hunted and pursued by Saul's mercenaries and the military rabble raised by his own son. He was plotted against and resisted in the best of his statesmanlike endeavors. But he had been put on Israel's throne by Israel's God, and by his efforts the nation was elevated to being a force to reckon with among the nations of his time. Israel from that day to this has never had a government more just, more effective, or more godly than that presided over by this man who asked God to be his salvation. And at life's end, as a final demonstration that God was his salvation, he died peacefully in his own bed surrounded by friends. David's prayer next says, "Let them be confounded and put to shame that seek after my soul." Well, it's the devil who's seeking after your soul and mine. To be confounded means to be surprised and confused by things not turning out as they were expected. Satan expects to destroy your and my soul in a devil's hell and make us as miserable as he can the whole of our life's journey leading there. Nobody from Adam onward has ever been smart enough to figure out how to keep that from happening. What a blessing that we have one who invited us, "Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Jesus Christ defeated the enemy of our souls, on some lonely desert mountain after a 40-day fast. He defeated him again in the final moments of Calvary when he gave a great shout, "It is finished." He is the author and finisher of our salvation, and he is willing to surprise our adversary and confuse his plans against us by causing our lives to turn out in ways the devil did not expect. The devil is put to shame when Christians follow God's law through life, and that turns out in the end to have been the best course. He plans for you to live as a slave to bitter hatred. A forgiving heart preserves you from having the acid of ill will corroding your soul. He plans for you to make money your God, and so be unprepared when the master says, "Thou fool, this night shall thy soul be required of thee." He is ashamed when a Christian has more pure joy in life by being generous and devout than avaricious and unfeeling. Maybe the most important part of this prayer is the phrase, "Let them be turned back and brought to confusion that seek my hurt." Have you talked to God today?
You have been listening to God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson. Reach him by email at GodsFiveMinutes@gmail.com. Tune in next time to hear more encouraging thoughts from God's Word on God's 5 Minutes with Pastor Ed Wilson.